Welcome to another episode of Imperfect Heroes Insights into Parenting. And it's been a while since I've done an episode just by myself. And I've had so many people wanting to get on the podcast as a guest that I am actually booked through December. And so I wanted to save a week, though, that was just for me, that I could talk to you about something that I feel is really important. And so today we are talking about a subject that has just perplexed parents for generations. Is there any harm in swearing around your kids? Can a few dropped F-bombs send them spiraling down the path of aggression? Well, join me as we explore the fascinating world of language and its impact on children and our efforts to create a more peaceful world. So, I am going to share my screen. If you're watching on Rumble or YouTube, I'm trying to do too many things at once. And so, you know how that goes. But if you're watching on Rumble or YouTube, I'm sharing the screen and then you're going to be able to see what I'm working on and how I'm doing this here. So today we're talking about parents and potty mouths and how words actually shape our world. And so we know that through, scientific studies, collegiate studies, studies done by police and therapists, that raging anger, of course, and it makes common sense, doesn't it? Raging anger can lead to violence and abuse. And then verbal abuse leads to low self-esteem and shattered emotions. And I think there are some people who have gone through that in their childhood and maybe by another abusive adult in your adult life, but we know what that means and what that feels like. And so we do know that people who often use anger to manipulate others do so from their own low self-esteem. Generally, they are often dealing with their own low self-esteem, and they are suffering from the abuse of their own childhood, where they were not able to understand their own emotions. They weren't allowed to label them. Sometimes they weren't even allowed to really have those emotions if they got in the way of an abusive parent or someone else that was in their life that was abusive. Sometimes it's a sibling, an older sibling. Far be it from me. I'm the oldest in my family, but sometimes these things happen, and so they were never able to process their own emotions, and so they are adults now that don't know how to manage their own emotions, and so they shoot into anger and sometimes violence because of that. And sometimes they have a need to feel powerful. And the language, that abusive language, and sometimes violent behavior, for some reason, helps them to feel more powerful over the people that are in their lives or powerful within their own lives, right? Sometimes they're trying to redirect attention from their own insecurities. And so, oh, I'm feeling insecure. I'm going to speak aggressively and powerfully to make so other people don't notice how insecure I really am. And so that's another reason. And sometimes they feel unworthy or unwelcome or just not able to manage in a group. And so they will use that aggressive language and sometimes even violence just to isolate themselves, to push others away and to isolate themselves. And so that's something that, happens. And so here's a few more things to think about then. Do we really want to go through life as a bully, as an adult bully, and that is terrorizing whomever? It may be the neighborhood, right? There's the neighborhood bully. There's a bully within the family. There are bullies at work and maybe even on a city softball team, whatever it is. But is that really how we want to go through life? And so instead, let's start getting curious about, why am I feeling these emotions? Why am I just throwing into such a rage so quickly? Now, you can always go to therapy, get some help. But a lot of times, I think that people who are dealing with these strong emotions are embarrassed, or they feel like, I don't need therapy, I'm fine, because they're afraid that it will maybe make them look weak. Other times, I have noticed that there are people who don't want to go to therapy because they're afraid that the cat's going to get out of the bag, that they will be identified as someone who is lacking, who is wrong, who isn't able to manage things. And that's kind of a little beyond what they are able to do right now. So instead of getting mad at ourselves or whatever, let's start getting curious about, why am I reacting this way that I am? And remember that, and this might be part of it, the more frustrated you become, the more nervous the people around you can become. And so if you're frustrated because, let's say, someone didn't follow through right, they didn't understand a direction that you gave them, or they didn't follow through on a promise on something they said that they would do, and you lose it and you're yelling and using aggressive language, then they are only going to become more nervous, which means the chances of them repeating or still making mistakes will increase. And so if you're frustrated by mistakes, generally the best thing that you can do is to calm down, talk to them about, okay, what is it that you thought I was asking you to do? Let's see where we went wrong here. And then they're going to calm down and, and be able to make fewer mistakes, which will make you less upset. And here's another thing, though, to consider is that outbursts of anger are often met with an equal or greater reaction. And so some people will just get so angry. Maybe they've dealt with bullying their whole lives. And so they're done. I'm done with this. And so if you're going to be aggressive with me, I'm going to come right back at you equally or worse. It kind of, I forget the old movie, but it was like, if someone hits us, we're going to put them in the hospital. Someone puts us in the hospital, we put them in the grave, right? It's that building up. And so things just accelerate and get out of control. And nobody benefits from that. Not only that, it's not just you and the person that you're talking about or talking to that can lose control and maybe get hurt, but in the process, other people can get hurt as well, either emotionally or physically. And so we need to think about what you're doing, and putting other people at harm. So we want to think really about that. And so here, let me move this a little bit. I don't know if this makes a difference for you guys, but I'll give it a try. So let's talk about potty words in kids. Is that really a big deal? When you use potty words around kids, or if you allow your kids to use those words too. And being a kindergarten teacher, that, I will say potty words when I'm meaning cursing, aggressive words. So there's a scientist, his name is Benjamin Bergen, and he's a cognitive scientist at the University of California at San Diego. And he also authored this book, What the F? And that's actually it, What the F? And what swearing reveals about our language, our brains, and ourselves. And so if you're interested in this book or learning more about Benjamin Bergen and his studies, I'm going to have that information down in the show notes and the comments if you're on YouTube or Rumble. So he has this book, but one of the things that he suggests is that swearing is the marijuana of language, and that when you swear, we find that it can lead to that hard, more aggressive behavior. You're not calming yourself down when you are swearing, for the most part. And you're not calming others down when you're doing that. And so it kind of takes us down this path. And children who are already in an aggressive mindset are more likely to swear when they're getting aggressive, when they're amping it up, right? And so they're more likely to hear the words that they heard. And it could be adults, it could be older siblings, it could be friends, but it also could be what they're listening to on television or on the screens, right? More and more, it's just the screens. And so, what are your kids listening to that might be opening the door to that? And do we want to do we want to pay attention to that? And here's the thing about kids, though, is they're still learning about social norms. They're still learning about reading the room, so to speak. And, is there a difference between the language I use maybe on the playground than I use in the classroom, that I use at home, right? And in fact, I remember, if you've listened to me long, you've kind of heard that I had a progression of getting into early childhood. And I started out with high school. And I remember teaching in high school that I would hear the kids using just horrible words. And this was a long time ago. I'm talking like during the OJ trial. This was that long ago. Anyway, and I would say, hey, like this hurts my heart. Please don't use, if you wouldn't say it in front of your mother, don't say it in front of me. And they'd look at me and say, my mom says this all the time, and I'm like, oh, okay. If you wouldn't say it in front of your grandma, don't say it in front of me. My grandma uses it all the time. I'm like, okay, just don't say it in front of me. It's not okay for class, especially not in my class. And so it was just interesting, the change, how things went with that, as kids okayed it because the adults around them okayed it. But little kids, they learn that these words have power, right? They get a reaction, ooh, or some people think it's hysterical, and it kind of is, when a little guy is cursing and they see that reaction they get. And so that encourages them to use it more and more and more, but they haven't matured enough, they haven't had enough experience to understand that there are places where this is not acceptable. It's not okay to use this. I remember when I was raising my own kids, and I had a neighbor, and we were great friends. She was an amazing friend, loved her to death, but she had a potty mouth. And we were in the car driving somewhere, and she let something fly. I'm like, hey, I'm like, ooh, kids, no, And she said, well, they're going to hear it sometime. I'm like, but not from us, not from us. And, she says, kids, these are just grown-up words. And I'm like, no such thing. If they're not okay for our kids, they shouldn't be okay for us. That was my philosophy. And so, we've got to learn to really wonder what we're teaching and how we're moving forward with language. Here's another opinion, though, about cursing and kids. So there was a study, let me move this, that was published in the Journal of Pediatrics. And the scientist's name was Sarah Coyne, and she's from Brigham Young University, which is in Utah. And here's some of the things that she found in her study. Whoops, let's go up there. So she also found a connection between early exposure to language and physical aggression. And in fact, what she found was that it really didn't matter where the source of hearing that early exposure to physical aggression, it didn't matter, just that exposure. So whether it was friends, siblings, parents, grandparents, a neighbor, and screen time, all of those things added up to the earlier that they were exposed to that. Her study found that there was a greater connection to physical aggression as the kids were growing. In fact, her quote was, profanity is kind of like a stepping stone. It can start a downward slide toward more aggressive behavior. And so if we're wanting our kids to, not get in trouble, at school or on the playground or whatever, and to have some real quality and positive, problem solving techniques, using profanity isn't going to lead them there. It's going to make the problem worse, and it's going to limit their ability to see other alternatives to solving problems. So let's think about this, though. Is there a cost to society for all of this? And the survey says, let's look at this. The acceptance of expletives has changed for the past few years. I remember growing up in Los Angeles, right? And we weren't allowed to use curse words, whether we were at home or at school. We would get busted. We weren't even able to say fart. We had to say boof. Ooh, someone boofed. Ish. And so it's funny that my mom, again, if you've listened to me long, my mom was raised literally by lumberjacks in the Northwest part of America. And, I know language was around those guys, but I do know that my grams and my pops did not put up with it from the girls. I don't know about my Uncle Verge because he was pretty good at it. But I do know that my mom and my aunts were all and there's the three girls, so they were all just very conscious about language. And I think Grams taught them that it made them sound cheap and uneducated and poor. And so that's where they picked that up. And so they didn't allow it at all. I also remember one of my brothers came home from school, and he's like third, fourth grade, something like that, and dropped an F-bomb in front of my mom. He didn't know what it meant. He just heard it at school, and my mom was like, "What?" He said, "Do you know what that word means?" He's like, "No," but he knew he was in trouble, right? And no, and she pretty much explained it to him and said, "Now, is that what you meant to say to me?" "No." "Okay, then let's not use that word." And so that was that's an approach, certainly. But I know that, that acceptance. I can remember that my parents, we were at a park one time, and there was a rowdy group of people, and language was starting to come out. And I remember my dad going over there and saying, "My children are here. We were here first. You stop the language or you find somewhere else to go." And he was very firm on that. And my dad, he was a slender, tall professor, not aggressive at all that I saw. And yet I remember him going there, and I thought, "Ooh, wow, Dad's really mad." And I was, that's something that stayed with me. But let's think about, as cursing has, expanded, and its acceptance in civilized society has expanded, what has equally happened to the violence in our society? I would submit to you that it's increased, right? We're seeing more violence within the schools, more fights, more breaking out of, disrespect. We've got increases in crime that's going on, and violent crime. Remember, oh gosh, I'm glad that it's kind of ended. But there was a while where there were kids in like New York, so a lot of the big cities, and they thought it was funny to just go and just bash someone right in the face for no reason. And they're not expecting it. And they thought it was so hysterical to watch them just go down. And so we really need to pay attention to, what is going on? And is this really a benefit? Is this really good for our society? You answer that. And is this trend compatible with our desire to promote kindness and peace in our societies. Everyone is talking about, oh, we're so divided. Oh, everyone is so angry. And I don't care which side of the aisle on. We all think that the other side of the aisle is being, unreasonable, and that they're rude, and they are not tolerant of other ideas. Both sides are saying the same thing. And the truth is, they're right. Both sides are. And so how are we going to encourage people and to help them to feel listened to? It's okay to listen to someone with whom you disagree. You don't need to call them names. You don't tell them they should go die and kill themselves, which is stuff that's happening on social media. If someone sees something that you disagree with, it's amazing how I'll put up something that I think is absolutely truth, that it's stated in a calm, nice manner, and yet I'll get things back. You're a racist. You're an idiot. You're looking for violence, which is so far. People who don't even know me, they haven't even met me. And just because they disagree with something I've said, somehow that makes it okay to say such awful things. I think it's not okay. So the question is then, what can we do instead? So as I was teaching parenting classes for the Division of Family and Youth Services back when we lived in Las Vegas, I did that for 16 years. And I taught all over. I taught in libraries and schools, at PTAs. I taught at churches and community centers. I also taught in several homeless shelters and 2 women's prisons. And what was interesting to me is that I would get from parents, I know I don't want to do this. I don't want to repeat these things that my parents did, but so then what do I do instead? I know what I can't do. I know what I shouldn't do, but then what do I do instead? Well, here's something then to think about with language. It's the same thing. So if I'm going to try and not do this, what am I going to do instead? Well, I can tell you that I have not always been pristine of language as I've grown and matured. And so forever ago, when I was young and a newlywed, I was actually a 911 dispatcher to help my husband, go through college. And that's where I worked. And in the police department, it gets a little lively, colorful even with the language. And I started picking up on some of that. And while I didn't use any of the big ones, I did spend a lot of my life using different swear words. I had 3 favorites. And I remember at one time, my 3-year-old, 4-year-old, he was 4, Shiloh was, he dropped a plate. He had a full plate of food. I'd set him up to fail, gave him a full plate of food for him to take over to the table. And he slipped. Food was all over the floor. And he let one of my words fly. And I'm like, Shy, you should not use that word. That's not okay. And what does he say? But mommy, you do, right? He was right. And so then I had to kind of step back, and we came up with a plan to try and help. And I still struggled for a while, for years, with trying to give up those swear words. It's hard to do. They're right there at the tip of your tongue. They come out and you don't even realize you've said it half the time, right? And so it takes time to become aware of when you're swearing, what kind of words are you using, and is this something that is going to help a situation or not help? Now, I'm not saying that everyone needs to completely give it up, but I am saying that if we can tone it down. For me, I decided I wanted to give it all up, all of it. And I wanted to draw closer to God. I wanted to feel that blessings of Christ and the presence of Christ in my life. And I read in the New Testament where Christ said, that let your, I don't know, cursings or whatever be yay, yay, and nay, nay, and nothing more. So he was saying, we don't need to use language like that. We don't need to. And so I decided I wanted to take up that challenge and try to move it out. But then, yay, yay, nay, nay doesn't quite fit into a lot of situations, right? And so I started paying attention to, I remember being a kid and watching the cartoons, with Sylvester the cat and Foghorn Leghorn and, some of those old cartoons. And I remembered them using terms like suffering succotash, right? And jumping Jehoshaphat and all of those. Well, I started using that. I started using that, and it would get people's attention. And what I found was that I had a way to really control a conversation, and it would be that humorous edge that sometimes it would just get someone so off center that you said that they're like, what? And they would start laughing, and it would help, de-escalate a situation. And it's funny that as people started recognizing that I was that was when I would use my curse words, right? Jumping Jehoshaphat, then they would say, oh, they would curse. Oh, I'm sorry. I know you don't curse. It's like, I don't care what you do. I just know what I'm doing. I'm not here to control you. I'm here to control me. That's all. I'm fine. And so but it's been kind of fun. I had, with my kindergarten, I would have so many playground aides, right? That would come and they'd say, boy, we can see your kids. They're easy to spot. And I'm like, what's the deal? Oh man, they are using the funniest phrases when they get upset or when they're surprised by something. And what's fun is I would have kids that would want to come up with their own. So you would hear me say, oh my holy cow, for the love of Pete. All, those familiar phrases. And then they started coming up with their own. And it's funny, I had one kid, oh my holy cheese puffs. Or so, they would come up with things, and then they'd come and say, I thought of a word, and they'd be so excited to share it with me. And it really did change a lot of the atmosphere and the the relationships within the classroom, just even in kindergarten. And it was a fun thing to see. I'll tell you, someone who really, really inspires me is Colonel Potter from MASH. And so in the show notes, I actually am putting a link to a YouTube, short YouTube video that shows some of the funny things that Colonel Potter would say when he was upset. Monkey muffins, that's a bunch of horse hockey, right? And I started, I watched several of these, and I started engaging them and rotating them through my language. And it's actually fun. I am someone who takes the Lord's name very seriously. And I believe, when he says, thou shalt not say my name in vain, I believe that. And so I've even quit with the initials that a lot of people, and I'm not saying this, I'm just telling you what I do, but I don't even use those initials that you'll see in text and stuff, because I know that if I use that, that's what I'm putting into someone else's head. I don't want to be responsible for that. And so if I do, it's like, oh my goodness, and I'll spell it out. Oh my holy cow, that's one you'll hear a lot from me. And so I'm working not only to be responsible for my language, but I am working to be also responsible for the ideas that I put into other people's heads. But that's me. You do what you want. So, oops here. And so I also want you to think about, we just finished that challenge. We just finished a 5-day challenge in July of peace, 5 days of peace. And I want you to think about what are the things that you can do to create more peace in the world. I think this is one thing that you can do. I think that this is one thing that we can help our children to de-escalate their big emotions and not escalate. And as they curse and as they get upset, they're ramping things up. I've heard people say, oh, I have to curse. It's what helps me get through. But why? Why is that? And if that's you, there we are. But I do think that there are some words that are so aggressive and so violent in nature that it's not helping any situation. It's not helping any situation. And when you've just caught yourself like, oh, wow, I really let it fly there. So what was going on? And what was my intention? Was I trying to hurt somebody? Was I trying to insult somebody? Was I trying to get their attention? Was I trying to make them think that I was serious, absolutely serious? And was there another way to manage that? Now, this is really connected to how we manage with our kids as well. Do we enforce boundaries through kindness? We can be firm. We can stand strong without using a voice that is angry. We don't need to yell. We don't need to be demeaning to our kids. But we can get the point across by using more brain power and by expanding their vocabulary. And that is one of the biggest things, the biggest differences with the education gap and the learning gap is simply the vocabulary that kids start kindergarten with, or even preschool with. It's huge. You can expand that vocabulary as kids are better able to identify their own emotions, what they're feeling, how they're angry, why they're feeling that way, what their expectations are, what it is that they're trying to accomplish with words rather than expletives. So I hope that helps you a little bit. And so we're going to end up, and I would love to connect further with you guys. I would love to hear about your family. I would love to hear about how wonderful your kids are and what are some of the things that you're doing with them to connect with them and to teach them. And then what are your dreams and goals for your family and for your kids? I'd love to connect with you. And so I've got the link to my calendar. If you're watching on YouTube or Rumble, it's here on the screen, but it's also going to be down in the show notes for all of the formats that we're talking about. You can just, it's called book, you'll see bookme.name. That's my calendar link. And I would love to have a conversation about what is going on in your life and these amazing little people that are in your life. And so I hope that you'll take advantage of that. So here, I'm going to stop share here. And I am going to say thank you for spending this time with me and allowing me to talk about a topic that I really feel strongly about and that I feel is going to be able to make a big difference in how we connect as a society and to become a society that is kind and compassionate in our words and our deeds. And whether it's on the podcast or on YouTube or Rumble, thank you so much for spending this time. It means the world to me. Be sure to follow so that I know that what I'm saying is helping you And I am open to hearing what are your needs and how I can help you meet those needs and solve some of those problems and help you kind of also celebrate the things that are already going amazingly in your family with your wonderful kids. So until next week, let's find joy in parenting. Bye, everybody.